Alright, so here's the plan for today. I'm heading down into the mines. Need to grab some iron and a bit of extra ore so I can finally get an anvil going and start upgrading my gear properly. That anvil's been on my to-do list for way too long. After that, I'll probably do a little fishing, see what I pull up, maybe get lucky and land something enchanted. And then, we're heading into the Nether, see if there's anything interesting down there worth grabbing. Never a boring trip down there. But while all that's going on, I've got some genuinely wild Reddit stories lined up for today. A little bit of everything. Some drama, some heartbreak, one story that's going to make you question a grown man's relationship with dairy, and honestly, one that's just going to leave you thinking for a while after. Some of today's lineup genuinely surprised even me, and I've read a lot of these by now. So let's not waste any time. Let's jump into the first one. Is a genuinely tough situation, and I have a feeling there's no clean answer here. Quick heads up before we get into it. This one touches on infidelity and some abuse, so it's a heavier one. Just wanted to give you a heads up before we dive in. I'm 21 and stuck between my pregnant twin sister and my parents. What can I do? This is a throwaway account. I'm not revealing too many details, he writes, but I'd appreciate honest opinions. I, 21 male, have a twin sister. When we were 12, we immigrated to Canada. When we started university, our parents paid for all our expenses so we could focus on studying and not worry about working to pay the bills. They had one condition: no having children before graduating, finding a job, and becoming financially independent. Okay, so this is a pretty strict arrangement right from the start. I get why parents would want that. They're trying to protect their kids' future, make sure the money actually goes toward building something instead of getting complicated. But it also means the second something goes off script, there's already a built-in threat hanging over everything before anyone's even done anything wrong. Keep that in mind because it matters for what comes next. Also, worth noting, financially independent is a pretty fuzzy bar to begin with. Is that the moment he graduates? The moment he lands his first job? The moment he can cover rent without help? Vague conditions like that tend to quietly become whatever the person enforcing them decides they mean in the moment, which is its own problem waiting to happen. There's also something particular about this being his twin sister specifically, and not just any sibling. Twins often grow up functioning more like a single unit than typical siblings do. Same age, same milestones, same expectations placed on them at the exact same time. Watching that same age mirror of yourself turn into the family's cautionary tale has to hit differently than if it were an older or younger sibling going through it. I've been with my girlfriend, who is the same age as me, for a year. My sister met Ed, 42 male, last year. From the start, my parents were against her dating an older man. They had many talks with her, but she insisted she loved him. Wait, 42? And she's 21? Yeah, that's a 21-year age gap. I get exactly why the parents pushed back on that immediately, honestly, before we even know anything else about the guy. And here's the tricky thing about pushing back hard on a relationship like that. Sometimes it works, and the person sees reason. And sometimes it just makes them dig in harder, because now it's not only about the relationship anymore, it's about proving everyone wrong, which is its own kind of trap. Later, she told my parents she was pregnant. They begged her to terminate the pregnancy, which upset her. She told them she did not need their help, said she was quitting school anyway, and went no contact. That's a full severing right there. Quitting school, going no contact, choosing him over her entire family, all in one move. That's not a small decision for anyone to make at 21. She messaged me yesterday saying Ed broke up with her and kicked her out. They had been having problems, and he has been seeing other women. She asked if she could live with me until she figures things out. She is due in March. So now we've got a pregnant woman, no home, no partner, and a family she cut off completely on her way out the door. And March isn't exactly far off either. This isn't a problem with months and months of runway to figure it out. There's also a decent chance that once this baby actually arrives, everyone involved ends up wanting some kind of relationship with this kid, whether or not the adults have patched things up with each other by then. Grandparents tend to soften once there's an actual baby in the picture, even after years of hard feelings. That doesn't fix the immediate housing problem at all, but it might mean this particular freeze-out doesn't last quite as long as it feels like it will right now. Here's the problem. If my parents find out, they will probably cut me off financially too. I want to pause right there for a second, because I don't think that's a paranoid assumption on his part. This is a family that's already demonstrated they'll cut someone off entirely the moment a line gets crossed. So him assuming the same thing could happen to him isn't dramatic. It's just reading the room correctly. I do not want to get involved in this drama. I am doing really well in school because I can focus completely on studying without worrying about work. And look, I get not wanting to get pulled into something messy that isn't yours. But I don't know if drama is really the right word for what's actually happening to his sister right now. My girlfriend, and we do not live together, thinks I am being an asshole. She says my sister is leaving an abusive situation and that I need to help her. I don't think the girlfriend's take should get brushed aside here either, by the way. She's not the one with anything financially at stake in this decision, which honestly makes her view a little clearer-eyed than his. She's looking at this from the outside and seeing someone who needs real, practical help right now, not someone testing a rule just to see what happens. Sometimes the person one step removed from a situation is the one who can actually see it most clearly, and that's its own quiet pressure on him too. This isn't just family versus sister anymore. It's now also boyfriend versus girlfriend, with him stuck directly in the middle of two relationships pulling in opposite directions at the same time. Here are my options. Be a good brother and a decent person and help out my sister and lose everything. Or tell my sister, you made your bed, so enjoy laying on it. What is the reasonable solution to this situation? How do I fix this without burning my future to the ground? Okay, so that's the whole dilemma, laid out plainly. Help her and risk his entire education, or turn her away, pregnant, and by his account, just out of an abusive relationship. There's genuinely no clean version of this, and I don't think it's fair to expect a 21-year-old to have a perfect answer here either. This is the kind of decision adults twice his age would struggle with. He added a bit more after the fact. My sister is keeping the baby. She is due soon. Perhaps I wasn't clear enough. When she first found out she was pregnant, she reached out to my parents. They begged her to get an abortion. She said no and told them she doesn't need them. She said she and Ed are fine without them. Then, after her breakup, she reached out again. But this time, my parents refused to even talk to her, so she called me instead, as a last resort. Wait, his parents wouldn't even talk to her? Not even to hear her out? I understand being hurt. I understand feeling disrespected after everything they warned her about turned out to be true. But refusing to even take the call from your own pregnant daughter, who just got kicked out of her home? That's a pretty hard line to hold on to. I also don't think the parents here are some kind of cartoon villains, even though a lot of this reads pretty harshly toward them. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. They moved their whole family to a new country, worked and saved to fund 2 university educations with one single condition attached, and then watched one of their kids walk away from all of it for a man twice her age, who it turns out was still legally married to someone else. That's going to sting badly, no matter how understandable her choices might look to us from the outside. I don't think their mistake was being upset. I think their mistake was letting that hurt turn into a blanket refusal to even pick up the phone when things fell apart. Ed is a deadbeat loser with a crappy job. He is still legally married, separated for years from his wife, and has kids with his wife. Yeah, that's not painting a great picture of this guy. Every new detail about Ed just makes it worse, not better. At some point, you have to wonder how many red flags one guy can wave at once before it becomes a whole parade. If I'm honest, that's the part that actually worries me most here. Not that a relationship simply didn't work out, but that a man in his 40s, separated but never divorced, with kids from that marriage, ended up with a 21-year-old and then discarded her the moment things got difficult. That's less bad luck and more of a pattern. In the comments, someone got downvoted for asking why his parents would even cut him off for helping her. Getting downvoted for a genuinely reasonable, clarifying question is such a specific internet experience. Sometimes a comment section decides a question sounds like an attack, even when someone's just trying to understand the actual mechanics of the situation. His reply, "Because there is a huge drama between my parents and my sister. They don't like the money they give me goes to her. If I do, I'll get cut off too, probably." That's actually a pretty telling detail if you think about it. It's not really about the original rule anymore. It's about control, making sure nobody, including OP, softens the consequence they've already decided she deserves. Then another commenter told him to look into women's shelters and asked point blank, was she abused at all? His reply, well, she said he was emotionally and verbally abusive, so yes. Money as leverage inside a family is honestly its own whole category of relationship strain. I've seen this pattern show up again and again in these kinds of stories. We're just protecting your future, quietly turning into, we're making sure you stay in line. And I don't even think it's always intentional on the parent's side. Sometimes it really is just fear, dressed up as a rule, because letting go of control feels safer than trusting your kid to make their own choices. If I had to put a label on what's actually happening in this family, it's less about a broken rule and more about conditional support getting dressed up as financial responsibility. The deal was never really, we'll help you succeed. It was, we'll help you succeed as long as you stay exactly within these lines. The second she stepped outside them, the money disappeared. And so, apparently, did the relationship itself. That's a specific kind of family dynamic, and it tends to leave the other kids inside it, like OP, constantly calculating the cost of being honest about anything. At first glance, this looks like a story about a family rule getting broken, but the real issue underneath it isn't really about the rule at all. It's about whether support in this family was ever truly unconditional to begin with, or whether it was always quietly contingent on obedience. That's the question this whole situation forces out into the open, whether anyone in this family wanted it to or not. When I first read the title here, my gut reaction was pretty simple. Just help your sister. Family's family. It's not that complicated. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized this isn't really a story about whether he loves her. It's a story about what happens when a family builds its entire support system around strict conditions, and then real life shows up with an emergency those conditions never accounted for. Honestly, there's no clean answer here. If OP takes his sister in, he's risking the exact thing that's letting him focus on school and build his own future. And that's not a small risk. That's tuition, stability, years of planning, potentially all gone in one decision. If he doesn't, his twin sister, pregnant, and by his own account just out of an emotionally abusive relationship, has nowhere to go. Not inconvenienced. Nowhere. His parents set a hard boundary, and his sister broke it knowingly. I'm not going to pretend she didn't make choices that led here. But consequences and abandonment aren't the same thing, and "you made your bed" gets a lot harder to say once there's an actual baby on the way and an abusive ex in the picture. If I had to guess, the real answer probably isn't take her in forever or cut her off completely. Practically speaking, a middle ground could look like a few different things. Helping her find a women's shelter or a transitional housing program built exactly for situations like this. Covering a deposit somewhere small without permanently moving her into his own place. Or simply being the one person in the family who still answers the phone, without personally shouldering the entire financial and emotional weight himself. None of those options are as simple as she moves in or she's completely on her own. But they're a lot more realistic for a 21-year-old who's still living under someone else's roof and rules himself. And honestly, even if he picks the safer option here and keeps his distance, I don't think that guilt just disappears. Choosing your own stability over showing up for a twin sister in crisis is the kind of decision that tends to stick around in your head for a long time, whichever way it ultimately goes. And I think that's honestly the hardest part of stories like this one. There isn't a version where you get to feel like the good guy all the way through it. Even the best available option here probably still leaves someone hurt, disappointed, or scared. Sometimes the right call is really just the least damaging one available, which isn't a very satisfying answer, but it might be the honest one. If you were in his position, no judgment either way, would you risk your own tuition and stability to take her in? Or would you look for some kind of middle option first? I genuinely don't know what I'd do here. Alright, let's shift gears completely. From something genuinely heavy to something that's going to feel almost like comic relief by comparison. Am I overreacting? My girlfriend left me over a cheese wheel. Okay, I need to hear this. Not some cheese, a wheel. I, 27 male, and my girlfriend, 26 female, were saving for a house down payment. I work and she is unemployed. I have saved $32,000, that's about $23,500 US dollars, and she has saved $4,000, close to $2,900 US, so I feel like I bear the brunt of the financial decision making here. I want to sit on that line for a second because I think it quietly sets up everything that happens after. In his head, saving more money seems to equal having more authority over what happens to all of it, not just his share of it. That's already a shaky foundation for a we decision, before the cheese even enters the picture. And honestly, the fact that he saved more doesn't automatically mean he gets more say over the combined total. Entering a shared goal together usually means both people get an equal vote, no matter who contributed which dollar amount, especially when her unemployment might not even be entirely by choice. I was doing the Oxford County Cheese Trail, apparently a real thing people do, and found a vault release. I love that this even has a name, vault release. I need to know who's writing the marketing copy for Cheese Caves, because whoever it is deserves a raise. They were selling a 140-pound wheel of 21-year-old cheddar. It was aged using a traditional cloth-bound method that's practically extinct here in Canada. And with over 21 years, it is extremely concentrated. Extremely concentrated is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. 21-year-old cheddar often sells for $120 a pound, almost $90 US. The farm was selling the entire wheel for $18,500, around $13,600 US. $18,500 for cheese. Let that sink in for a second. That's roughly the price of a decent used car, or several semesters of college tuition, or, apparently, one wheel of cheddar, depending on which financial advisor you happen to ask. If I cut it into 200-gram wedges and sell it at $60 each, about $45 US, I can make $38,000, roughly $28,000 US. Wait, he actually bought the whole wheel? I bought the cheese wheel and brought it home in my truck. I need you to actually picture this for a second. 140 pounds of cheese just riding shotgun home like a passenger. When I rolled it into our apartment, at first she was excited. When I started to explain the financials and investment potential, she turned sour. She didn't yell, but expressed she wasn't happy about how I spent my share of our house savings. She is now staying with her parents. I actually think it's worth giving her some credit here. She didn't yell, she didn't smash the wheel through a window. She heard the pitch, understood exactly what had actually happened, and calmly left. That's a pretty controlled reaction to finding out your shared house fund just became a dairy product. I think she's overreacting because she doesn't understand the Canadian housing market. Our savings is not enough for a down payment without a ridiculous mortgage, and we need to take these opportunities. I'd gently push back on that doesn't understand the market framing, honestly. Being upset that your shared savings just got spent on a giant, currently inedible cheese investment doesn't require a deep understanding of mortgage rates. It just requires noticing that the money's gone. AIO? Or am I the only one with ambition in our relationship? Ambition and impulsiveness aren't actually the same thing, and I think that's the gap he's missing here entirely. I'll steelman him for a second though. Buying rare, appreciating goods as a kind of investment isn't a crazy concept on its own. People do it with wine, with watches, with all sorts of things. The problem was never really he tried an alternative investment. The problem is he spent 5 figures of joint savings on something with zero resale plan, 0 buyers lined up, and apparently 0 way to even physically access the product. And he did all of that without a single conversation first. If he'd come to her with the idea first, hey, I found this interesting opportunity. Can we talk about maybe putting some money toward it together? This could have gone a completely different way. Maybe she says yes. Maybe she says no. Either way, it would have been a decision they made together, instead of one he made for both of them. Okay, the comments on this one are incredible. Someone asked if he's even been able to slice and taste the cheese yet. His reply? I haven't figured out how to open it yet. It's covered in thick wax. It looks like a cannonball. I have tried using a hairdryer and a knife, but I can't get into it. A cannonball. He paid $18,500 for an edible cannonball he currently cannot open. And side note, if a block of cheese needs a hairdryer and a hunting knife just to access, maybe that's a sign it wasn't exactly built for casual home consumption in the first place. One commenter really goes off on him. I'll read it close to how they actually wrote it. Bud, you have no plan. You have no buyers. You are bad at math. You aren't in the restaurant industry. You're not connected to unload it while it's still good. It's perishable as soon as you break into it. You've also said in another comment that you're trying to melt the wax, which will absolutely ruin it. You're fumbling around in the dark. You made a bad call, like a seriously bad one. His response? The cheese is no longer perishable. After 21 years, all the moisture that would cause it to go bad has been replaced by calcium lactate crystals. Okay, sure, buddy. I'll actually give him this one weirdly. That is a real thing that happens in really aged cheddar. Those little white crunchy bits genuinely are calcium lactate crystals. So he's not technically wrong about the cheese science. He's just catastrophically wrong about basically everything else in this plan. Then a second commenter actually did the math for him. You say this cheese often sells for $120 a pound, yet you actually paid $132 a pound for it. In that case, it sounds to me like you overpaid and could struggle to turn a profit off it. Next you say, if I cut it into 200-gram wedges and sell it at $60 each, I can make $38,000. 200 grams is 7 ounces. You could get a maximum of 327-ounce slices out of a 140-pound wheel, assuming zero waste. At $60 each, that would get you $19,200, not $38,000. Your math is totally off for one thing, and I suspect you're going to struggle to find hundreds of customers willing to pay $60 for 7 ounces of cheese, so most likely you will lose money from this venture. Let's just sit with that gap for a second. He told her this would make $38,000. The realistic number, according to someone who actually sat down and did the math, is under $20,000. And that's assuming he sells every single wedge with zero waste to actual paying customers he doesn't currently have. That's not a rounding error. That's basically half the promised number, best case scenario. That said, your money is yours to do what you want with, but if you have a partner you are planning a future with, it's a bad idea to make big decisions like this without running it by them first. It breeds distrust, resentment, instability, etc. You're supposed to discuss things together and make decisions together. That's how partnerships work. In this case, maybe your partner could have checked your math and explained how far off your numbers were and saved you from a costly mistake. YOR. YOR, for anyone wondering, is basically this subreddit's version of a verdict. You're overreacting. Except here, it's getting handed right back to him, not to her. And here's the best part, his actual reply to that. You are dividing the 140 pounds by 7 ounces, but you are forgetting that there are 16 ounces in a pound. So if you divide the 140 by 7, the 7 goes into 14 twice. I genuinely do not know what that means, and I don't think it fixes his math either. There's a very specific kind of confidence that only shows up when someone is extremely sure they're right and extremely wrong at exactly the same time. This is that on full display. At this point, I don't even think this is really about cheese anymore. I think this is a guy who got so locked into the deal of a lifetime that he stopped being able to hear anyone tell him otherwise. Not his girlfriend, not a room full of strangers doing his math for him, nobody. If I'm naming the actual pattern here, it's not really about cheese, or even about money specifically. It's about treating a shared financial goal like a personal side project you occasionally update your partner on after the fact. A lot of relationship money problems don't come from bad math. They come from one person quietly deciding they're the sole decision maker for the relationship's finances, and the other person finding out about major purchases only once they've already happened. Look, I don't think this is really a story about cheese. It's a story about making a massive, 5-figure financial decision that directly affects a shared goal without even a conversation first. Would I be upset if my partner spent our combined house savings on a 140-pound wheel of cheese they can't even open? Yeah, I would, and I don't think that makes me the unreasonable one in that scenario. Springing an $18,000 wax-covered cannonball on your girlfriend and then getting defensive when she's upset about it? Yeah, I don't think she's the one overreacting here. And honestly, if anyone out there does eventually get a wedge of this cheese, I feel like that's its own separate, deeply chaotic story just waiting to happen. Part of me does actually hope he eventually gets that wax off, if only because I want to know what $132 a pound cheddar even tastes like. But I also hope, for both their sakes, that whatever happens next involves an actual conversation instead of another solo purchase. Would you have stayed as calm as she did, or would you have said a lot more than she did on the way out the door? Okay, after that one, let's slow things down a bit. This next title sounds like it could be nothing, or it could be something. Let's find out. Am I overreacting that my wife did not wear her wedding ring multiple days in a row? For context, I, 33 male, have been married to my wife, 32 female, for a little less than a year. However, we have been in a stable, exclusive relationship for 10 years and have been living together for 8. She is the love of my life. She proposed to me about 6 years ago. I said yes, but we ended up having to postpone our wedding several times due to our school schedules, venue cancellations, etc. We have been wearing wedding bands ever since the proposal. So really, they've had these rings on for 6 years now, even though they only actually got married recently. And I actually like that she's the one who proposed. You don't hear that in these stories very often, and I think it's worth noticing. Honestly, 6 straight years of wearing a ring before the wedding even officially happened says a lot about how seriously they were already treating this relationship, long before it became official on paper. There's also something worth noting about the full 10 years together before the wedding actually happened. That's a long runway of just being a couple, without any ceremony hanging over things. I think that's probably part of why this disagreement stayed relatively contained. They've clearly got a decade of practice being a team already, even with this particular topic slipping through the cracks. 2 days ago, she came home from shopping and said that the cashier was hitting on her and possibly asked her out. I am not threatened by other men hitting on her, since our relationship has a very strong foundation, and we usually find it comical. However, she mentioned that she did forget to wear her wedding band, and that's possibly why the cashier was flirtatious with her. Okay, so far, genuinely nothing wrong here. A cashier flirted, she mentioned it, they probably laughed about it together. That's a completely normal couple moment. The fact that she brought it up to him at all, unprompted, actually tells you a decent amount about the baseline level of openness in this relationship. Plenty of people wouldn't mention a random flirty cashier at all, just to avoid the conversation entirely. Yesterday, we were planning on going to see a movie. As we were walking out the door, I noticed that she was not wearing her ring again. I asked, in an admittedly not pleasant tone, "So do you not wear your wedding ring in public anymore?" She was kind of taken aback and said, "No, she just forgot to put it on," and went and put it on before we left. Ouch. That tone's going to land badly no matter what the actual question underneath it is. And he owns that himself, which I actually respect. A lot of people in these posts never admit that part out loud. If he'd asked that exact same question gently, this whole day probably goes completely differently. Same words, basically. Totally different outcome. That's the thing about tone. It can turn a completely fair question into something that feels like an accusation, even when the actual words are almost identical. The rest of the day, things were a bit tense, but we ended up seeing the movie and thought we enjoyed it. Going and sitting through an entire movie with that kind of tension still hanging in the air already sounds exhausting on its own, honestly. It's also worth noticing that the actual blow-up didn't happen right at the door. It happened afterward, in the car. once the tension had time to sit and build through the whole movie. Sometimes the gap between an incident and the reaction to it is exactly what turns something small into something that feels a lot bigger than it actually was. However, once we got back to the car, her attitude clearly shifted. I asked how she was doing, and she said, "I have a headache because of you." That's a rough thing to hear directed at you, even when you understand exactly why she's upset. She then explained how she didn't appreciate me bringing up her not putting on her wedding ring, that she's human and made a mistake and forgot to put it on. I was just like, okay, that's fine. But then she continued, clearly upset, saying that she's an attractive woman and she can't help if people hit on her and ask her out. I was like, okay, that's true, but if she was wearing her ring, that would probably prevent people from asking her. She said that the cashier probably wouldn't have seen it and would have asked her out anyway, and that she, as a person, is not defined by whether she wears the ring or not. Here's what's interesting to me. I think they're actually both a little right and mostly just talking past each other. He's not wrong that a ring can be a visible signal to some people. She's not wrong that plenty of people will ask anyway, ring or no ring, and that her worth isn't tied to a piece of jewelry. Those two things can both be true at the exact same time, and I think that's part of why this fight went in circles instead of anywhere useful. It's also worth noting how easily that attractive woman line could read two completely different ways depending on tone alone. As someone standing up for herself, or as someone being defensive about something. Text strips out a lot of context that would probably make this instantly clearer if you were actually standing in that car with them. There's also a pretty common pattern buried in here. Someone gets asked a slightly pointed question about something small, feels a flicker of guilt even though they didn't really do anything wrong, and that guilt comes out sideways as defensiveness instead of as a calm explanation. I don't think she was hiding anything. I think she felt caught off guard and got prickly the way most people do when that happens. We drove home in mostly silence, but she did apologize that she snapped at me in the car, which I accepted. I want to emphasize that we do not have any previous trust issues, and I am in no way insinuating that she has been intentionally not wearing her ring. This is also the first time I noticed it. However, I am a bit startled by how defensive she got in the car, and don't really know how to process what happened. That distinction actually matters a lot. This isn't a story about suspicion, or somebody hunting for evidence of something. It's a story about a badly timed question, landing on an already bad day. He posted a small update after this. I think many people missed the whole context of my post, how we've been wearing wedding bands for 6 years. Wedding was postponed due to our grad school schedules, and our first venue canceled on us. It's clear that I absolutely used the wrong tone/wording when I asked her whether she doesn't wear the ring. I'm going to apologize for that right away. I've learned that most people don't wear their wedding bands. People keep talking about diamonds getting snagged, rings being bulky. This whole thing is regarding simple wedding bands. That being said, we never actually established how we felt about wearing the rings, and I have just assumed over the years that we both wore them equally. I'm going to ask what her feelings are towards the rings. Honestly, that's a pretty mature thing to admit mid-argument. Realizing you built an entire assumption on something you'd never actually talked about out loud. For what it's worth, ring-wearing habits genuinely vary a ton depending on job, culture, and personal comfort. Plenty of people in manual labor jobs take rings off constantly just for safety reasons, and plenty of others just settle into a comfortable go-to symbol that isn't jewelry at all. There's no universal rulebook here, which is honestly half the point of this whole story. Then a bigger update came later. I never would have thought that this post would have blown up the way it did. I was amazed at the diversity of responses. My main takeaways were that my passive-aggressive comment at the start of the day was uncalled for, and likely overshadowed the rest of our day date. I also had no idea that so many married couples did not wear their wedding bands regularly. My parents never took their rings off, and I figured that's how it was with everyone. Finally, I suppose I was naive, thinking that wearing a wedding ring would deter people from hitting on my wife, Credit where it's due here. It's actually pretty rare to watch someone read through a comment section full of hundreds of strangers and come out the other side going, okay, yeah, I was wrong about part of this, instead of just digging in and getting defensive. There's something almost funny about a random internet comment section basically functioning as unpaid couples therapy here. Hundreds of strangers weighing in, and it actually nudged him toward a more self-aware, less defensive version of the conversation he needed to have anyway. I think a lot of us grow up with one version of normal from our own parents and just assume that's the universal standard for everyone. Turns out, ring habits are a lot more personal than most people think. Then, the actual resolution. My wife came home from work and we sat down for dinner. I started the conversation first by apologizing for my tone/snarky question the day before. She said thank you and accepted. I then said that I was triggered hearing her tell me that she was hit on by the cashier and her explaining that it may have been due to her not wearing her ring. She asked me whether I wanted her to tell me when people flirted with her. I said sure, but it's up to you. We hugged it out. Not every argument needs a 5-page resolution. Sometimes we hugged it out really is the whole ending. I then asked why she got so defensive in the car after the movie. She said she wasn't feeling great and that she didn't like me insinuating that it was her fault she got hit on and that she sometimes forgets to put her ring on. I apologized again and acknowledged that even though we have been together a decent amount of time, we never actually discussed what we wanted the value of our rings to represent. I actually suggested that I'd be okay wearing them less if that was more comfortable. She said no, she wanted to still wear them out in public, just that I need to understand that people forget things like this, and it's normal. End of story. We are on good terms, and she thanked me for bringing the topic up again so we could work things out together. I also think it says something good about both of them that neither one used this fight as ammunition later. No, well, you did this, getting thrown back around in some future round 2. Just an apology, an actual conversation, and moving forward together. That's rarer than it probably should be. At first, this looked like it might be a story about trust, or maybe jealousy simmering under the surface. But it really wasn't that at all. It was about 2 people who'd been wearing the same rings for 6 years straight, without ever once sitting down and asking each other what those rings actually meant to them individually. If I'm naming the actual pattern here, it's assumption without conversation. 6 years of quietly assuming they were on the same page about something neither of them had ever actually discussed out loud. That's an incredibly common thing in long relationships. You settle into routines so naturally that you forget to ever check whether you both genuinely agreed to them, or just both happen to be doing the same thing at the same time. Honestly, I think most long relationships have at least one version of this story buried somewhere in their history. Some small, forgettable thing that turns into a real conversation purely because of bad timing and a tired day. Honestly, out of everything we've covered today, this one's probably the healthiest. Not because nothing went wrong. He clearly started this whole thing with the wrong tone, and I think it's worth being upfront about that. But because once things got tense, they actually sat down and talked it through, instead of letting it fester for weeks or turning into one of those slow burn resentments that blows up months later over something totally unrelated. If there's a lesson buried in here, it's probably this. It's rarely actually about the ring itself. It's about whether 2 people can sit down after a bad moment and talk about what's really underneath it. What about you guys? Do you and your partner wear your rings every single day, or is that just not really a thing for you two? Now let's head into the nether and see what it has in store for us. Alright, last one for today, and this title already sounds like it's about way more than just a name. Am I overreacting if I break up with my fiancé over a name change? A few weeks ago, my fiancé, 27 female, and I, 28 male, were talking about our wedding, which is scheduled for June of next year, and our honeymoon. At one point, I jokingly said something to the effect of, "We'll see about that, future Mrs., my last name," and she visibly cringed. Okay, that cringe is doing a lot of work in this story. Cringing isn't something you can really fake convincingly in the moment. That's a pretty raw, honest tell. That wasn't some planned, thought-through conversation. That was a genuine, unfiltered reaction slipping out before she could catch it. She told me she isn't going to be Mrs., my last name. And I said, okay, then I'll be Mr., her last name, because I don't really care if she takes my name or I take hers. I just want to share one. Notice, by the way, that his first move wasn't, well, then you're taking my name. It was offering to take hers instead. That's not somebody digging in on tradition. That's somebody who just wants a shared outcome and genuinely doesn't care which direction it goes. She said, no, I'm keeping my name and you can keep yours. I asked who our future kids would be named after. She said her because she's the mother, so I'd be the odd one out. He also adds an edit. She's opposed to hyphenating too. She's adamant they each keep their own last names, and any future kids will only have hers. I want to really separate two things clearly here, because I think a lot of the discourse around a story like this collapses them into one issue. Keeping her own name, completely fine. Not a character flaw, not evidence of anything about how committed she is. Refusing to explain herself to someone who's told her exactly why this matters to him. That's the actual problem, and it's a completely separate issue from the name itself. If this were simply, I want to keep my name, I don't think there'd be much of a story here at all. For what it's worth, keeping your own name after marriage has become a lot more common in general over the last couple of decades, for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with the strength of the relationship itself. So on its own, her wanting to keep her name really isn't the unusual part of this story. For context, I grew up in foster care after both my parents died. I didn't have any other biological family, so I was bounced around from home to home from the ages of 5 to 18 when I aged out. I never felt welcome in any of those foster homes and never felt like I had a real family. I always swore I'd have a real family one day, though. So naturally, I want to share a last name with my wife and our kids. I truly don't care what name. Mine, hers, a new one we both choose. It doesn't matter to me. I just want a real family that I feel connected to. Yeah, that's the part that really reframes this whole thing for me. This isn't about tradition or ego or wanting his own name specifically carried forward. He's telling us flat out, he just wants to feel like he actually belongs to something after 18 years of not really belonging anywhere. For a lot of people, a shared name is just paperwork. For someone with a background like his, it sounds like it's a lot closer to proof that the family is real. We've been dating for 3 years and engaged for almost 5 months, and this is the first time she said she doesn't want to share a name. Previously, she never said anything when I called her the future Mrs., my last name. So either this is new or she's been holding it in. I've tried to talk to her about why she doesn't want either of us to change our last name, but she doesn't want to discuss it further, and I'm at a loss as to what to do. We don't actually know for sure if this is a brand new feeling for her, or something she's quietly had all along and just never brought up until the wedding made it real. Both are genuinely possible, and honestly, both come with their own separate problems. If it's brand new, that raises the question of what changed. If it's something she sat on for years, that raises the question of why she let him believe otherwise for so long. Would it be an overreaction to break up over this since she won't talk to me about her reasons? She's acting like everything is normal, so I don't know what to think. He added an edit after the post blew up. Thank you to all who replied or sent PMs, except those who called me a misogynist for even suggesting she change her name. I've decided to try to have one more serious conversation with her about my feelings on the subject. I've packed a box with all the things she's left in my house, so if it doesn't go well, I'll return her belongings and end things. We're meeting at a park, and I have a good friend who is going to stay nearby but unseen, just in case things go south. If for no other reason than to have a witness that I tried everything I could to talk things out. I keep coming back to that box, honestly. That's not the move of someone approaching this casually. That's someone who's already mentally rehearsed the worst case version of this conversation, more than once. It's a pretty heavy level of preparation for a single conversation. But if you've already been shut down every single time you've tried to bring this up, I get wanting to walk in with some kind of plan, instead of just hoping it goes better than the last 5 attempts. I'd also gently point out that walking away from a 5-month engagement is a massive step. And I don't think he's approaching it lightly, given how much preparation he's clearly put into just having one more conversation first. If he really strips away his own backstory for a second, this is honestly a pretty common modern disagreement. Plenty of couples navigate this exact conversation without it turning into a breakup discussion. What makes this version different isn't really the topic. It's that one side has explained herself in detail, and the other side hasn't engaged with it at all. The comments here are actually pretty thoughtful. One commenter said, "Tell her you'd like to change your name and why." She may not realize the reason for it, and may be projecting her desire to maintain her name on you. If she can't hear you and understand how hurt you are, I'd be second-guessing too. His reply, "She knows why. She knows all about my past." Another commenter, "Have you discussed with her your reasons for wanting to share a name? Instead of asking her why she doesn't want to, be emotionally vulnerable and tell her why you want to. If she isn't open to compromise on that, then it's not compatible. And good you figured out now." His reply, "She knows why it's important to me. I've said several times in our relationship that I want to feel connected and that I'm looking forward to sharing a name with my future family." So it's not that he hasn't communicated, it's that communicating hasn't actually gotten him anywhere with her. A third commenter, "Why is she so opposed to it? Has she said it's something very important to you? Is it important enough that it could end a relationship that would otherwise be headed to marriage? I don't think you are overreacting at all. Your feelings are completely valid. She may not want to talk about it anymore, but she is going to have to if she wants the relationship to work." His reply, "She won't tell me. When I ask, she says she won't discuss it further and stop speaking unless I change the subject." And one final comment that really got to the heart of it. How will you discuss other conflicts or important issues once they inevitably come up during the course of your marriage? To me, the fact she won't even have a conversation about it is a red flag. His reply, "This is a concern. We're usually on the same page about issues, and when we aren't, we can come to some kind of compromise or mutual understanding. But her not even discussing this is giving me pause." What strikes me, reading through all 4 of those exchanges back to back, is that nobody in the comments actually landed on "she's wrong for wanting her name." Every single one of them zeroed in on the same thing, the silence. That's a pretty strong signal that this isn't really about picking a side on the name itself. It's about the fact that one half of this relationship has completely stopped participating in the conversation. Honestly, I don't think the actual disagreement here is the real problem. Wanting to keep your own name is a completely reasonable thing to want, full stop. I want to be clear about that because I don't think this story is "she's wrong for wanting her name." But refusing to even explain why, especially to someone who's told you flat out that this touches something really deep for him, that's the part that would worry me too. I'll speculate a little here, and I want to flag it clearly as speculation because we genuinely don't know her side of this. Maybe she's worried that any reason she gives will sound selfish next to his story. Maybe she doesn't fully understand her own reasons yet and would rather say nothing than say something she can't fully defend. Maybe it really is just discomfort with conflict in general. Any of those are possible, and it's also worth remembering that plenty of people find conversations about identity and family expectations genuinely hard to put into words, even when their reasons are completely valid underneath. Struggling to articulate something isn't the same as having nothing real behind it. And I think that's exactly why her silence lands so much harder on him than it might on someone else in his position. For most people, a partner needing a little space before a hard conversation is just normal relationship stuff. But for someone whose entire childhood was defined by people not explaining why they were leaving or why a placement was ending, silence itself probably doesn't read as "she needs time." It probably reads a lot closer to the exact pattern he spent 18 years trying to escape in the first place. A name is one thing. Shutting the conversation down entirely is a different thing altogether. At that point, it's not really about the name anymore. It's about whether she's willing to sit with something uncomfortable for his sake, the same way he's clearly willing to sit with something uncomfortable for hers. If I'm naming what's actually happening here, it's less a disagreement and more a stonewall. There's a real difference between "I disagree with you" and "I won't discuss it." And the second one tends to do a lot more damage to a relationship over time, because it doesn't just close one conversation, it quietly signals that some topics are permanently off the table. At first glance, this looks like an argument about a last name, but the real issue underneath it seems to be about whether either of them is willing to be uncomfortable for the other person. He's been willing to sit with an uncomfortable truth about his own childhood and lay it out completely openly. She hasn't been willing to sit through a single conversation about hers. Whatever's actually going on for her, though, a relationship where certain topics are just permanently sealed off isn't really sustainable long term, even if the topic itself seems small from the outside looking in. If she can't even talk about this with him, it's fair to wonder what happens the next time something actually hard comes up. A job loss, a health scare, raising an actual kid together. Those conversations don't get any easier than this one. I'll also say, if she does eventually open up about her reasons and they turn out to be something completely understandable, I hope he's able to hear that without it undoing everything he needs from this relationship too. This doesn't have to be a situation where only one of them gets to have their needs taken seriously. I really hope that talk at the park went somewhere honest for both of them. Do you think refusing to explain herself is the real red flag here? Or am I reading too much into the silence? All right, that's everything I've got for today. Quick recap if you're just skipping around. First up, we had a guy stuck squarely between his pregnant twin sister and his parents' ultimatum, with genuinely no clean way through it. Then a guy who turned half of a house deposit into a 140-pound wheel of cheese he still can't even cut into. After that, a couple who actually sat down after a rough, tense day and talked it all the way through like adults, instead of letting it fester. And finally, a guy trying to figure out whether a completely shut down conversation is really about a last name or about something a lot bigger sitting underneath it. Some of these were sad, some were honestly hilarious, and at least one involved an $18,000 wheel of cheese nobody can even open. Honestly, if I had to pick a favorite, it's probably the cheese one. I don't think I'll stop thinking about that guy trying to melt wax off a cannonball with a hairdryer. If there's one thread running through basically all four of these, it's honestly just talk to each other. Sounds obvious, I know, but half of today's chaos could have been avoided with one honest conversation happening at the right time, instead of after the fact. If you enjoyed hanging out with me while I dug around down here, do me a favor, drop a like, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It genuinely helps a lot more than you'd think. Let me know down in the comments which one of these you had the strongest opinion on. Brother, cheese guy, wedding rings, or the name change. I read every single one of them, and I'm especially curious where you guys land on the wedding ring one, because that comment section always seems to end up split right down the middle. These relationship advice ones always hit a little differently than the usual chaos, so let me know if you want more of this mixed into future batches. Alright, I think I've got enough ore for that anvil now, so that's a win on both fronts today. Some ore and a genuinely unhinged batch of Reddit stories. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care, everyone.